A recipe for more is really, I think, thinking about life beyond what's beyond our survival, what's beyond the mask. When our masks are off and we're exposing our most tender and vulnerable parts of ourselves, that's really the most more that we can experience.
I am Sally Halderson, Managing Director of Porchlight Book Company here in Milwaukee, where we specialize in shipping bulk and customized orders for authors and corporate events around the world. We have the honor today of welcoming a new author, Sara Elise.
Hi.
Sara Elise is a Black and Indigenous, queer, autistic femme creative who has been featured in Dazed, Playboy, Afropunk, Healthy-ish, Well and Good, Nylon, Style Like You and Them, among other publications. She spends much of her thought space contemplating pleasure, pain, healing, destruction, and growth, and how inextricably those concepts are linked. All of which can be found in her new book, A Recipe for More, Ingredients for a Life of Abundance and Ease, a book that guides readers on their journey toward developing greater personal awareness and well-being. Or, as Publishers Weekly so aptly summarized, this book is perfect for those seeking to make a change but need a bit of a kick in the pants to get started. But I would also add that this book is perfect to energize anyone, seeker, striver, searcher, who has been on a quest toward creating a life filled less with overwhelm, artifice, and detachment, and filled more with creativity, curiosity, honesty, and engagement. Sara Elise reassures us that we are free to choose with intentionality which ingredients we desire in order to create a truly delicious life. And we know the book just came out, and you all on this interview have not had time to read it. So we are lucky enough to begin tonight with Sara reading from A Recipe for More.
Oh, great. Thank you. I wasn't prepared to read at first, but I love this plan, and let's do it.
Let's do it. You know, while you look for your page, I do want to ask, and I should have asked when you came on, do you prefer Sara or Sara Elise?
Sara Elise is great.
Okay, fantastic. Okay.
And thank you for that really wonderful introduction. As I was listening to you describe the book, I was thinking that we should have hired you to write the description, because
thank you.
I loved it. Thank you.
It's terrific. Can't wait to get into it. So let's give them a little taste.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm actually going to be reading from one of the later chapters, chapter 7, Use Your Fear and Your Rage. So typically when I read, I actually start with the introduction and give everyone a little taste, but let's just go and let's just jump in and go deep.
Let's do.
So the chapter starts off with an introductory quote. I realize that if I wait until I'm no longer afraid to act, write, speak, be, I'll be sending messages on a Ouija board, cryptic comments from the other side. When I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, then it becomes less important whether or not I am unafraid. And that's from Audre Lorde, The Cancer Journals. Fear is an enormous part of my daily experience. As a Black and Indigenous femme, queer woman living in a world where people still have a very open and vehement oppositions to my lived existence, fear is a baseline feeling that sits in my bones. It intermingles with my intuition and guides which route I take home, to whom and how I respond when catcalled as I'm walking down the street to the grocery store, and where I choose to travel internationally with my partner. And most people don't know this, but as an autistic person, fear permeates every millimeter of me, filling my veins with a pulsing charge that might spark and ignite at any moment. I'm fearful of interacting with people, fearful of smells and particles and things sticking to my hands, fearful of loud noises and flashing lights, fearful of all that I might not be prepared for experiencing at any moment that might overwhelm me and plunge me into a meltdown. I'm fearful of leaving my apartment and sometimes even of being in my apartment, Because I was raised in a highly monitored household where I wasn't even allowed to close my door, I'm fearful of being watched and fearful of being taken. The OCD and paranoia I experience as comorbid symptoms of my autism make it very difficult to exist in my body because the fear of most things outside of my control typically leads to a crippling and exhausting anxiety that I have to push through in order to exist in this world every single day. Even though I enjoy the world and this life and humans and desperately want to interact and connect and relate, I'm fearful because at any moment, someone might get too close or something might be way too sticky or sounds and lights might be way too loud, and my mind will begin to fill with smog. Dark, thick molasses starts to creep through the ridges of my brain until my head feels heavy and I can't shake it out. I can do drugs or drink plenty of alcohol to free myself, but without those numbing agents, no matter how much I stim or rest or move, sometimes the smog just won't loosen its hold on me. My ears feel clogged, my eyes lose their sight, and all the loud noise of my existence bubbles up inside of me until it erupts into a meltdown, finally allowing everything to reset. Sometimes the fear takes over before I can even get outside for the day, and I can't leave the safety of my bed. But then other times I can travel and talk to new people without numbing myself first. It all depends on whatever chemical concoction is happening in my brain on that given day. Each day is different, but every day is filled with self-coaching, mantras, and pushing through my fear in a distinctive and exhausting way. Several years ago, I had to undergo a small surgery in which a monitor was installed next to my heart. For a decade, cardiologists haven't been able to figure out why my heart seems to get overly excited in response to seemingly mundane situations, but then has difficulty rising to the occasion when I'm doing something active, like running on a treadmill. They haven't been able to find any solutions, so now have resolved to just monitor me as I record my symptoms on my corresponding heart monitor phone app. But it all feels so clear to me that it's almost amusing. My heart is simply responding to the world around me the way that my brain does. She's overly sensitive and easily startled. She's ready with a fight or flight response to every situation, even and sometimes especially when it's just a new person approaching me with a comment about the weather. Once I realized that my inherent fear-based reaction to everything wasn't something most other people experienced, I thought I was doomed. My fear felt like a clear signal to me that what was happening around me was wrong. If I let that dictate how I engaged with and interacted with the world, I would have no new experiences and no friendships, and I would never take any risks. Things felt much safer in my bubble of routine and comfort. But then all the Gemini in my chart probably had a tantrum, and I started pushing myself to live outside of my comfort zone little by little. I mean, I'd been doing that my whole life, mainly so that I could try my best to fit in with others in typical life circumstances that seem normal and easy for everyone else to handle. But now I was intentional about it because I always feel scared and never feel ready. I've learned to push through those feelings and do the thing anyway. I intentionally chose to do things that I was afraid of and put myself in situations that I knew I had anxiety about, because I realized that these feelings, like all emotions and feelings, would pass. And once they did pass, would I want to still be in bed, or would I want to be in another country? Would I want to still be watching TV, or would I want to be supporting a friend's live music performance? Sometimes the answer would be yes, I would still very much want to be in bed, because we stand rest, and you can reference chapter 1 in my book called Fuck Being Busy.
Yep.
But when I'm able to identify that what is holding me back is fear or anxiety, then I can intentionally choose to do the thing anyway. This doesn't mean that I'm not prepared with my noise canceling headphones, my light blocking shades, and in the winter, my puffy coat and big scarf for sensory protection. But it does mean that I can give myself permission experience the world, even if it is in my own unique way.
Thank you so much for reading that section. It gives us so much of a picture of where you speak from in this book. And I think that's going to be really informative as we move along with some of the subject matter in the book. But let's start, if I might, since you read that piece, is writing and publishing and promoting a book carries a lot of demands, like you just listed, whether it's travel or a lot of people or unpredictability. How are you feeling about being a new author and having this book enter the world and speak to the people who are pulled toward it?
Excuse me. I feel a lot of mixed, complicated emotions that I feel towards everything. I have a lot of fear and anxiety and hesitation and self-doubt. And I also feel like this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and that everything happens for a reason, and that everything in my life is aligned right now in a way that makes sense. I feel deeply grounded in this process, and I feel like I can sit and be resonant with that, even though I'm also experiencing all of these other feelings as well. So it feels right. Yeah,
I think one of the things that we learn as we read your book is this, not methodology necessarily, but this encouragement toward self-assessment and taking a beat, assessing what we might lose if we give up opportunity because of our fear and because of a number of different ways that we're not managing our lives in a really intentional way. Let's start with, could you give a little bit of a backstory about yourself and about your journey that culminated then into writing this book?
Yeah, sure. So I was born in Maryland. I grew up in both Massachusetts and Connecticut, and went to university in DC at Georgetown Business School. And during and after business school, I was interning in investment banking on Wall Street. I know so many people watching are probably like, what?
This is why it's so great to start here, because it really is. This is such an interesting journey that you've taken.
It's interesting even to me. It still feels like a completely different life, a completely different world. But I really thought that I was making the ultimate career choice, right? I thought that I was doing the thing that I'd been told to do. And I thought I was doing the thing that would open up the most doors for me. I never really considered happiness or wholeness or fulfillment in that process, like so many of us, I think, when we're sticking to a plan that we've been told to stick to. So I was just doing this plan and trying to be the best at it. But while I was working in investment banking, it's just funny, even every time I say it.
It comes out of my mouth and I don't understand.
And then I laugh.
Yeah.
When I was working in investment banking, I was doing the thing that I'd been told to do. I was doing a good job, and I was deeply, deeply depressed. And all of my free time, and I talk about this in the book a little bit, but all of my free time I was spent just numbing myself. I didn't know what I liked to do outside of work because, capitalism doesn't encourage us to have hobbies that don't make money. So I had no hobbies. I just spent my excess time, which was very little time, drinking and drugging myself numb in an effort to kind of release the stressors of the day. I was just self-harming all the time. I was really depressed. I was not feeling good in my body. I mean, I never even considered what feeling good in my mind or my body was. And so I just had a series of several moments that happened while I was working in banking. And I just started to question what I was doing there. what was going on, what had led me to this point, and why was I spending so much time doing something that didn't feed me at all. And in fact, beyond not feeding me, just gave me so much anxiety. And so even just going to work was like a series of me working through my anxiety each day. And yeah, so once I started that questioning process, I kind of just couldn't stop. And then I ended up, short condensed version is I ended up discovering my passion for food and learning about how food impacted my well-being, my mood, the way I interacted with people. I founded my catering company over a decade ago, and that evolved into an event production and design company. And I began working in the food and hospitality industry. And then I, several years ago, co-founded a hospitality experience center in queer and trans people of color overseas. And yeah, everything has kind of just led to this culmination point of the book representing over a decade's worth of life pivots and developing new pleasures and passions and learning and understanding about myself.
And making choices to take those disparate pieces and make a life out of them, I think is one of the strong takeaways from the book, is that we have, even in small ways, an ability to make a choice that can enhance our experience in terms of that feeling of groundedness within our own selves. And you mentioned that when you were succeeding, as we often think, success equates everything that you were experiencing early, I think that you were also numbing. And so many ways, even if we aren't, living a high lifestyle, or even if we're not, trying to climb mountains or whatever, we all experience some draw toward the numbing. And we often do that through this busyness that we experience, both that we participate in. We are participatory into our busyness. When people ask you how you are and you say, "Oh, busy," we think that that's like a little chit in the accomplishment column, as opposed to it maybe being something we're either allowing to have happen to us or we're creating for ourselves unconsciously. And in your first opening section of your book, you argue against this sort of collective chronic addiction to busyness as a proof of success. It can often actually be a guise or an affliction. And so as an antidote to your personal crisis, you write, quote, "I began choosing myself in small ways," which harkens back to what we just said about these, where we have the agency to make a choice, even if it's not to, enact complete upheaval in our lives, at a drop of a hat. And by doing so, you say you've crafted a life that you describe as so full, but not busy. So can you pull those two things apart for us a little bit and talk about how fullness does not equate busyness, and how abundance is really what we're after?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that our culture, and I think especially in New York, we have this cultural addiction to busyness. And it really, and I like that you also brought up the chapter about work and busyness, because a lot of people think that busyness and work are the things that are going to validate us, right? It's tied to our ideas of self-importance and self-value. And I think that it's only once we really confront that and begin questioning, and dismantling that within ourselves, can we really then begin to explore a life of abundance? And when I think of abundance, I think of being present and mindful to what's around us, and more simply, us all living a life that we're thriving in and not just fighting to survive in. And a lot of people think that abundance is merely financial. So that's why I also talk about that in my chapter about work, because it's not, it's a mindset that we can have in our approach to how we view everything in our lives. So I think the self-value and the importance being tied to how busy we are actually really just stems from a feeling of lack within ourselves, a feeling of scarcity. And our feelings of scarcity are really the thing that we have to go against. It's believing that we're not all inherently deserving of abundance as our birthright. Right. And that's the quickest way, I think, to actually block the flow of abundance in your life is to kind of participate in this mindset that we're all told that we're not all just inherently deserving of it. We don't need to do something to be deserving of the abundant energy in our lives. It's just existing all around us and within us that we can access at any time. And when I think of ease, I consider a lot what Buddhist meditation practices have told me about ease. Because when I'm meditating, I still have all of these racing thoughts, right? And so I can either sit there and judge each thought and be like, oh, you're such a bad meditationer. Or I could just, let them come in, observe them, and then let them leave with ease. So that's what I think of when I think of ease, is I think, is my energy moving in flow without a bottleneck, without constriction? And then I think the feelings of lack, the feelings of scarcity, those are the things that create the bottleneck and create the constriction. And then the concept of ease actually reminds us that we're not in control, right? So I'm not in control of any of my racing thoughts while I'm meditating. It's just, yes, we have agency to choose and we have agency to manifest, but at the end of the day, we're not in control, as much as I would love for that to not be the case sometimes.
What does we try?
Yeah.
I love that redefining these words, because I think it is really interesting that the subtitle uses abundance and ease. And what you're saying to us here, and we're reiterating, is that abundance isn't the bank account overflowing or the cup overflowing necessarily. It's a matter of it being counter to scarcity. And that ease isn't Netflix and chill, or, I mean, sometimes it is, right? Or, it isn't not going to work, but it is releasing the constrictions and letting that flow happen with whatever it is that you're doing, even if that is work, even if it is difficult or challenging, you can still have abundance and ease while still striving.
Right. Like whatever we're encountering, how do we approach it with curiosity rather than constriction? It also, from someone that I have attempted to learn meditation from, used to give us this exercise to, whenever we had one of those, many of those unbidden or unwelcome thoughts, and you just say, that's a thought. That's a thought. And you acknowledge the fact that it is, and you let it go, as opposed to doing that judgment, like you said. Right. And there's a lot of that kind of advice in your book about how to rethink some of the coding that we have about our emotions and our feelings. And I'm jumping a little bit here from all of the questions that we have, but
I think because you opened with a piece about fear, and that fear passes, that emotions are just an emotion. And I think one of the things that we all can, we either learn as we mature, or maybe we should learn as we mature, is that we are not our emotions, right? Our emotions are not the only thing, and we are other. And so I'm curious if you have some of that advice, those pieces that I've taken out of your book that talk about how do we build enough space from our feelings to hear what they're telling us rather than react to them. So getting the message from, as you said, from your heart monitor, that you're actually at, I think, quite in line with your head, right? Your head and your heart are actually in line, which came as a surprise, but how we can experience a feeling like fear, say that's a fear, that's a thought, and not necessarily be compelled by it to react to it.
Yeah, I think it's really just, what we were talking about before, just releasing our need for self-judgment all the time, which really is just it's not, I don't think, inherent to who we are. I think it comes from society, right? It comes from, again, lack, because it's our desire to fit in, or our desire to, have people accept and love us, which is great. But I think that if we can release some of the self-criticism and self-judgment, and then when we do feel the feelings, just allowing them to sit, and stay, but not allowing them to overstay. I think, because then that becomes another cycle that is very detrimental. And I think also feeds into our ego's need for self-indulgence and self-importance. But yeah, I think just observing the feeling, sitting with it, grieving through it if you need to, and then releasing it. And then it'll probably come up again.
Yeah.
Because that's what feelings like to do until they're fully processed.
Right. I think so that connects all of our pieces here so far with, as your story reveals to us that sometimes you come to a place where you need to make a change, and fear can sometimes keep us in the same place where we're at. But as you said, if we are only responding to the fear, we may not wake up in that, the country we always wanted to visit, or having breakfast with the person we always wanted to chat with, or whatever those things are that we desire. We aren't able to get there if we're too beholden to the emotion, right, and not letting it sit there. And that's one of the wonderful aspects of your book, is that you give very these nuggets that I think no matter what anyone's current life situation is, they'll be able to see these moments to react and think differently, and maybe make a choice that is really, really good for them. And another thing that I really love about your book is that it's really about feeling good, and it's about giving other people moments of feeling good, and it's about you feeling good. And there's just that it's so positive. And so I have a few questions about that, but I'm going to start with pleasure. And as a culture, I guess, we don't really talk about pleasure with any kind of heft or respect. And I think we think of pleasure as being something we get after we work. So after that we earn, right? That we earn the pleasure. So as a pleasure advocate, I think you identify as a pleasure doula, that I've read somewhere. You enlarge our understanding of pleasure like this. I'm going to quote you and say, quote, "I'm always thinking about how I can live a life that activates me, that encourages excitement and change and growth." So again, we're sort of redefining the word pleasure and talking about what excites or activates you? How is incorporating pleasure in our lives essential to making us feel more connected to ourselves, our bodies, other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love talking about pleasure, as you know.
We should talk about it more. I love it. Please.
I mean, that's my life's argument, is that we don't talk about it enough. And, we don't feel it enough. We don't experience it enough. I think that there's an element of presence that's needed to experience pleasure. And that's why I think that choosing to incorporate more pleasure into our lives is really intentional. And it needs to be a really intentional and important practice. Because in order to really feel it, you have to be embodied. You have to be present in the moment. You have to be present in your body. Because when we're shut off, when we're numb, or when we're only in our heads, which, all of us experience this all the time, we're not actually experiencing the present pleasure to the capacity that we could experience it. So in that way, I feel like incorporating more pleasure in our lives and the act of actually experiencing it helps us to stay connected and present in our bodies, because it's basically a requirement.
When I was forming this question, I was thinking about pleasure and thinking about how we don't treat it. Like we talk about fear and we talk about anxiety and depression. We talk about a lot of feelings that tend to be on the negative side of the spectrum or the heavier side of the spectrum. And then when we talk about things like happiness, there are a million books out there that are about, the happiness plan and the happiness pursuit and whatever they all are. And I don't think that when I started thinking about the word pleasure, I thought, what do I equate pleasure with? Is it, a spoonful of ice cream? Is it petting my dog? Is it laughing at a joke? And I think taking some time to self-evaluate what pleasure is and I use very superficial examples in what I just said, but I think that that's one of the things you encourage us throughout the book is to take that self-assessment. And this is an opportunity to say, what brings me pleasure and how do I value that, bring value to that and say it's important.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the goals of the book. And I would even argue that the examples you gave aren't superficial, right?
Yeah, yes. Right. I just negated yes, you're right.
Yeah. You're not superficial. And there are moments when you're licking ice cream off a spoon, like what? And you're fully embodied in that moment. You can be so present with the textures and the temperature and the taste. And there's so many different things that are happening there that if you're fully embodied and present with it, you get to experience all that yummy juiciness. So I think that that's a great moment of pleasure.
You said this a little bit when you were talking about the changes you made in your life in going into hospitality and food and hosting. And I did go to the website for your international location, which is beautiful. But there's a lot in this book also about how we treat other people, not just ourselves, how we can treat them with instances of abundance, ease, provide them pleasure. When you host friends in your home or at an event, for example, you write, quote, I love to think about how we can respond to beauty, joy, and pleasure in a way that preserves, celebrates, and enhances them, your guests. How to treat each moment as a practice, a dedication to those we love. And it's important, not to alienate other people in this pursuit of finding ourselves, but instead to better understand ourselves so we can give more to those people. And I think one of the things that you stress throughout your book is the better we understand ourselves, the better gifts we can offer to the people that we love.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most important aspects of, why I, at least personally, strive to understand myself so that I can understand the world better and offer myself more to people that I love and who I want to create safe spaces for. I think I grew up in a household that really prioritized the idea of, or I don't even know that this was intentional. So I'll just say they did a great job at teaching me how to be an island. And they did a great job at teaching me how to prioritize my survival. And maybe the survival of our immediate family unit. But beyond that, it wasn't really our responsibility. So when I moved to Brooklyn and began building community and family here, my family here has taught me that couldn't be further from the truth. And further also from the type of life that we're all actively creating together. A life that really nourishes both me and my community, because they're not mutually exclusive.
Right.
And yeah, just understanding that when my family thrives in abundance, I thrive in abundance. We all do. I think often how I can create a life that's filled, like you said, with beauty and joy and pleasure. Yes, but also a life that has, and I talk about this in my book too, a life that has a ripple effect, a butterfly effect out into the world. So I'm just always wondering, how do I create a life that really inspires the cultivation of all the things that I'm prioritizing in my life? How do I create a life that inspires the cultivation of that with others, which then creates a culture of caring that we're all strengthened by? So
that's wonderfully said. And that ripple effect is exactly what we're getting at with all of this, what we offer other people, or even in the small changes that we make. And so let's return back to that for a minute about, you have a section, I want to say it's maybe the third chapter on question everything. And so you start with, in order to make these changes, in order to invite instances of change to you, that ability to do that, you have to start by asking questions, and you have to figure out where you're at. And as you just said, with the way that you grew up in your family structure, there were many ways that you were constricted and perhaps focused on that, the nuclear family, and not rippling out into the world. So give us perhaps some examples, or some definition behind what you mean by questioning everything, and finding comfort and the ability to question everything. Because I think for a lot of people, it's a really difficult thing to do because they feel like it's destabilizing. But I don't think that the message that you offer is about destabilization as much as grounding. So let's talk a little bit about what you mean by questioning.
Yeah. I do also encounter that people feel very destabilized by questioning things, which has always been interesting. I think that's an autistic gift, is that I can really just question and receive the information without necessarily placing that much judgment on it. But yeah, and I also really love thinking about what I'm currently defensive of. And how that defensiveness is actually blocking my understanding or blocking the flow. Again, talking about like the ease of the flow. Yeah. How anything that I'm defensive about in my questioning is actually blocking what I'm supposed to be understanding or could potentially be understanding. Right. But yeah, no, I actually just wrote a bit about this in my latest Substack post because yes, shameless self-promo. You can.
We're all about celebrating you and your work right now.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. You can follow my Substack at saraelise.substack.com. There is housed a project that I call Field Notes, Love Notes. Oh. And I actually just wrote about this in my most recent note because writer Alicia Kennedy asked recently, what is something you're gleaning in relation to your well-being? What are ideas that you've been searching for the sake of learning, for the sake of being in the world, rather than in search of answers to any specific query? And I think that's what I'm talking about when I think about questioning. Developing a practice of gleaning. Questions don't always need answers, but oftentimes just consideration. So when I'm thinking about a questioning process, I'm advocating for the fact that sometimes the question is just about the process of the questioning rather than the conclusion that you're getting an answer from.
And that might be one of the things that makes us so uncomfortable, is this feeling like to question means I have to have an answer, right? Or I have to find an answer. I have to make a change respective of my question, when in actuality, it's perhaps more of an observation.
Yeah. And I think, just in the form of our lives, answers present themselves all the time. Just, in hindsight, everything is 2020. And when you look back, you're like, oh yeah, I thought I knew all the answers and thought I had this all planned out and nothing went according to plan, but then it ended up actually being great and beneficial, even more to me than I could have even imagined.
Right.
I think the questioning process and the questioning practice is actually just about starting the questioning as the practice. That's the thing. That's the conclusion in that moment versus searching for a conclusion with your question.
Yeah, that's well said. I really like that. You mentioned, as we were talking about this, about your autism being a superpower, or that it helps in ways of questioning and getting feedback. But in the book, you talk about when you sort of obtained your diagnosis and what that meant to you, and how it explained a lot of your younger years and how your experiences were when you didn't know that you were autistic. And you mentioned, actually, I should back up a minute and tell our friends who are on this call that Sara Elise includes a number of other artists and writers in the book to sort of flesh out some of these ideas. And you use one of my favorite authors, Catherine May, in the book, and you mentioned her. So it came to mind that in her wonderful book, The Electricity of Every Living Being, or Every Living Thing, that she shared how she found a sort of greater peace with herself when she got her autism diagnosis. And you also had that experience. And so I want to broaden this out a little bit and say, like, with regard to naming and identifying, you write something really profound, which of course is blocked on my notes here. So I'm going to move that and read it. Quote, "The act of naming is both a conclusion as well as a beginning," which I could just sit and think about that endlessly for hours. But if you could tell us, how does naming and identifying serve to enable our understanding of ourselves and give us a sense of a new beginning?
Yeah, I getting my autism diagnosis several years ago when I was 30 changed my life. I finally had language for everything that I had been experiencing my entire life. I mean, up until that point, I actually seriously thought that the only logical conclusion was that I was an alien, not from this, like, this was a serious up until
something has to explain it. And so it must be terrestrial.
The only thing that made sense to me is that I was an alien, not from this planet. I was from another world. I'm just passing through. And that's why I didn't understand all the social rules. That's why when I felt like I was being really kind and friendly, people would respond aggressively to me and be very upset with me. That's why I had such difficult things doing basic things that everyone else seemed to have an easy time doing, like going to the post office or opening packages. But, receiving my diagnosis tied everything together and made so much sense and really helped me, I think, begin to settle into myself. And I think that is one of the powers that comes with naming and identifying, is a settling begins to happen. I think up until a few years ago, I was trying really hard constantly. My life was filled with trying to change who I was to fit into the world, not realizing that I just have a different neurotype, and it's an entirely valid way of existing and seeing and being in the world. Now I feel more angry at the world for not being set up to be welcoming to people like me. But I also feel more motivated now to change that and to create safe spaces for neurodivergent folks and other people who may not feel safe in the world as we know it. And I think also with the naming and the identifying, I'm now less mad at myself. So that's been a really beautiful change. I love myself so much more. I don't see things that when they don't work out, I don't see myself as the issue. I see it as a mismatch between me and how the world has been set up, not as a mismatch between me and this made up perfect version of me that I'm striving to be because of internalized ableism. So, I think the identifying and the naming is one of the most powerful things we can do for ourselves, even if it's just for ourselves, right? Like it doesn't need to be a professional diagnosis, or you don't need someone to tell you about yourself all the time. Sometimes it's helpful, but sometimes it's not necessary. And it's just necessary to do the naming and the claiming for ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a really remarkable perspective, and one that I can apply in numerous ways to my life. And one of the things that you just said was about all of the energy that went into pretending to be a perfect self, or to be a person who fits within a structure that isn't built for you. And you talk a lot about masking. And there's a great analogy that I've literally told a half a dozen people since I've read this in the book. So I was like, yes, this is what this means. But you're talking about like being invited. I'm going to paraphrase, being invited to an event, and you wear high heels, but you find out when you get there that you're hiking and everyone else is wearing sneakers. Some version that everyone else is wearing appropriate footwear for whatever it is that you're doing, and you're wearing inappropriate footwear. And you have this trained, this inherent, no, I'll tough it out. No, I'll be fine. Don't make any kind of consideration for me. I didn't get the memo, or whatever those things are. And this amount of energy that goes into being our false selves. And I think, I don't think that anyone doesn't recognize situations where they have been that person, where they feel like the fish out of water or the alien, and to some varying degree. And I think what you write about masking really revealed how much it is part of our chronic busyness and our numbing, and all of the ways that the world makes us feel different. And so we feel like we're working so hard to fit in that we are so exhausted that then we create these ways to blame ourselves for it. So the multitude of ways that we mask difference to whatever level our difference is, mask our vulnerabilities even. What's gained? You talked a little bit about what you gained, but what's gained when we put those masks down?
All the yummy stuff.
I love that. That's perfect.
Yeah. I mean, I've never, as an autistic person, and, I'll just speak for me, even though I know that this is a trend amongst autistic people, but I've never been interested in small talk. Like, in fact, it literally pains me and makes me physically ill. Yeah. Have surface level conversation. But I'm so interested in information sharing, especially when that information gives me color about the depths of someone. And I think that with masks down, that's where the connection happens. That's where the energetic juiciness and the magic is exchanged. I think the masks are something we've all, like you said, we've all developed to different extents in order to protect ourselves, because they're there for our survival. They're part of our survival toolkit. And so much of my book, I talk about not just surviving. And a recipe for more is really, I think, thinking about life beyond what's beyond our survival, what's beyond the mask. When our masks are off and we're exposing our most tender and vulnerable parts of ourselves, that's really the most more that we can experience, right? Together. I actually have a tattoo on my chest here that says "In it for the blood," that I got years and years ago. But I really feel like that kind of just sums up how I feel about that question, because it's that pushing the extremities, the just what's beyond our mask. That's the more, that's what I'm always here for.
Right. This is not a tattoo contest, but I have one on my arm that reminds me to be brave, because showing up in the world takes some bravery. Yeah. And, trying to live as fully as possible sometimes means that you have to acknowledge the fear, but do it anyway. And sometimes we need to remind ourselves of these things by putting them on us, I think. Right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have many everywhere. So
if we sort of return back to fear a little bit, maybe not return back to fear, but return back to all of the ways that we have been affected over the past 3-4 years, longer lifetimes, of ways that we are fearful in the world, and how difficult it is then to enjoy our lives, to indulge in pleasure, to feel good. And you have a chapter on feeling good. And I am obsessed with it, because when people ask me, how are you? I'm always like, oh, it's morning, ask me later. Or, oh, I haven't decided yet, or, oh, whatever. And so I've practiced since reading this, actually answering people, I'm good. And it feels very foreign. Can you tell us a little bit about that chapter about reclaiming feeling good, even though there are many things around us that often are very validly consuming and make us feel bad in some ways, and how it's not invalidating those things to feel good?
Yeah, absolutely. When I talk about getting used to feeling good for more time than we don't, I don't mean that we don't have bad days, or that there are times that we feel really bad, because that's part of it. That's part of feeling whole, which ultimately is I think, one of my goals for my lived existence. But when I talk about feeling good in that chapter, I think I mean that oftentimes we spend our lives self-sabotaging and upper limiting and pulling our own damn selves down from states where we feel good, because those states, when we get there, are outside of our comfort zone.
Right.
So upper limiting is a concept that I am obsessed with. You talk about obsession. It's one of my special interests.
Yeah.
I learned it from author Gay Hendricks, and it's basically when we put self-imposed barriers on ourselves, which is just so interesting. It's so deep that we do this. And we notice, wow, everything's going great for me today. So then, because that feeling is foreign to us, or outside of our comfort zone, like you said, we might subconsciously then pick a fight with a lover. Yeah. Or we might do anything that subconsciously brings us back down into the state of comfort that we've told ourselves that's the story that we've told ourselves, that that's where we deserve to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm basically just arguing for a life where we've told ourselves that this is our deserved feel-good state. What if this can be our deserved
level up? Yeah.
Right. What if we can just level up even a little bit outside of our comfort zone and get used to feeling good in that state? How does that change our lives? Really, it changes our life. And then once we're in that state, how do we think, even just imagine slightly outside of the realm of that comfort zone and get used to feeling good in another comfort zone? And yeah, it's just interesting how we do it and we bring ourselves down. But I think it's okay to, like you said, it feels foreign. I think that's okay, right? Like, we don't need to feel comfortable all the time in our lives. We need to feel safe, but we don't need to feel comfortable. And we can actually continue stepping into our self-expansion the more uncomfortable that we feel, and the more we get used to being in a state that might even be slightly outside of our zone of comfort, but that actually benefits us and has us living and loving and getting pleasure and thriving even more than we thought was possible for ourselves.
I think it's a good segue into talking a little bit about agency, which I think is an underlying, like, it really girds your book. It really, like, it very much is about making, not just wanting to make a change, not just wanting your life to be different, but also truly understanding that you have the agency to do that. And we can often feel like we have systemic resistance, or that we're drowning beneath the weight of all of our responsibilities, that we're beholden to our traditions, that we can't make other people comfortable, and think of all the ways that we feel that we don't have agency. And I guess what is that first baby step that we can take to sort of grasp onto our own lives and say, I get to mold this, I get to shape this? What's that first step or mindset switch that we need in order to really believe in our agency?
Yeah, I think the first step actually goes back to something we already talked about. I think the first step is the questioning, because I think that only when you sit back and question everything in your life can you really then determine if it's working for you. And I mean, literally everything. And I gave many questions, places to start. For your relationships and your career. I gave all of those examples in the book. And I think that is a strong first step, because once you question everything, then you can kind of take a self-assessment to see what's working, what's not working, what do you want to change? And then from there, I think it's the imagining.
Yeah.
Because that's what's then gonna, I am using a term that I read by Akweke Emezi, but they talk about world bending.
Okay.
And I just love this concept, right? Like, it's basically the idea that you can imagine the life that you want for yourself and bend it into existence, right? Like, time isn't even linear. So you're actually just pulling whatever it is that you get from the questioning, whatever you're imagining, whatever you're desiring, you can pull it towards you now and bend it into your present life. I think the questioning and then the imagining are two of the first steps for creating a life that you choose.
I think that is a beautiful sentiment to end on, because we have reached 7:00. which
Wow.
always sneaks up on me, and I'm never prepared because there are always more questions that I want to ask. But for our audience and everyone who's going to watch this video following, be sure to buy a copy of A Recipe for More, read more from Sara Elise in her Substack, check her out on all of the things that she is doing to create a ripple effect for all of us in making our lives more abundant and more full of pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was so fun.
much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.